The radio crackled with desperation as Captain Maya Reeves adjusted her headset inside the Black Hawk, the pilot's voice cutting through the rotor noise to deliver the emergency call. Unit Charlie 7 had been pinned down for 18 minutes under concentrated enemy fire with casualties mounting, and a medic was reporting a critical femoral artery bleed on Corporal Jenkins with less than 6 minutes remaining until the golden hour window closed. Maya's fingers moved across her tactical vest, checking magazine pouches and medical supplies while her mind calculated the insertion approach, knowing that every second cost blood. The pilot's warning came sharp and urgent as tracers streaked past the aircraft's left side, enemy fire finding their altitude while dust clouds obscured the landing zone below. Maya moved to the open door and gripped the fast rope with gloved hands, her thermal scope revealing 3 muzzle flashes from elevated positions surrounding the pinned unit. The helicopter shuddered from impacts against the fuselage as she kicked out into darkness, the rope burning through her grip while rounds snapped past her descending form. Her boots hit dirt as an explosion erupted 30 meters to her left flank, the concussion wave shoving her sideways while shrapnel pinged off nearby rocks. Maya rolled to her firing position and brought up her rifle, the thermal scope painting white-hot signatures of enemy combatants across the ridgeline. The RPG team at 400 meters appeared first in her reticle. 2 figures crouched behind a boulder as one prepared another rocket, and she sent 3 controlled shots that dropped both before the weapon could launch. The machine gun nest required different tactics, so she marked its position with her laser designator and called for suppression from the orbiting gunship. 25-meter bounds brought her to Charlie 7's position, where 6 soldiers pressed themselves against a stone outcropping, their returning fire sporadic and poorly aimed from exhaustion and shock. Corporal Jenkins lay against the rock face with his right leg twisted at an unnatural angle, blood pooling beneath him in quantities that meant seconds rather than minutes. Maya dropped beside him and pulled the tourniquet from her kit, her hands working the strap around his upper thigh while she shouted for the nearest soldier to maintain pressure on the wound. The tourniquet clicked tight at precisely the compression needed to stop arterial flow without causing tissue death, and Jenkins' eyes focused on her face with the clarity that comes from sudden hope. Her radio call went out with command authority codes that identified her unit and clearance level, requesting immediate medevac to her position with enemy contact ongoing. The response came within 40 seconds as another Black Hawk diverted from patrol, the pilot acknowledging her authentication and estimating 90 seconds to arrival. Maya directed the mobile soldiers to establish a security perimeter and laid down covering fire toward the remaining enemy positions, her own rifle adding precision shots that kept hostile heads down and prevented maneuver. The medevac helicopter appeared as a dark shape against darker sky, its approach marked by the distinctive whump of rotors pushing through mountain air. Maya ignited a green chem light and tossed it to mark the landing zone, then helped drag Jenkins toward the incoming aircraft while rounds continued impacting around the position. For wounded soldiers loaded in the promised 90 seconds, medics pulling them aboard while the pilot held steady despite taking fire, and Maya sent the final authentication code that cleared the aircraft for immediate departure to the field hospital. The eastern horizon showed the first gray promise of sunrise as Maya trudged back through the forward operating base entrance, her uniform stiff with dry blood that belonged to Jenkins and 3 other soldiers whose names she had learned during the extraction. Her rifle still radiated heat from the engagement, the suppressor discolored from repeated firing, and she felt the particular exhaustion that follows adrenaline's departure. The guard at the gate nodded recognition at her tactical gear and waved her through without question, his attention already shifting to the next vehicle approaching the checkpoint. Have you ever witnessed someone exceed every expectation placed on them? Drop your state or country in the comments. The medical facility stood across the compound as a low concrete building with harsh fluorescent lighting spilling from its entrance, and Maya walked toward it knowing that protocol required post-mission evaluation after any combat engagement involving casualties. The nurse at the intake desk looked up from her paperwork as Maya approached, her eyes widening at the sight of a female operator in full tactical gear, carrying weapons still marked with combat residue. Maya provided her name and unit designation while unslinging her rifle, explaining that Special Forces didn't advertise their personnel roster and that most people never saw operators outside of mission profiles. The nurse nodded slowly and gestured toward an examination bay, her professional demeanor masking obvious curiosity about how a woman had come to wear the gear and carry the scars of direct action work. Major John Brennan entered the medical facility through the side door with 3 other officers trailing behind him, his attention immediately fixing on Maya as she stood beside the examination table removing her tactical vest. His voice carried across the open bay with the particular authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance, demanding to know why a woman was wearing Special Forces equipment and claiming operator status. Maya turned to face him and responded with her unit designation, Task Force 38, and her current classification level of Special Compartmented Information with additional protocols, offering to provide direct contact information for her command structure. Brennan's dismissal came swift and absolute as he stepped closer, his words shaping the accusation of stolen valor, while his expression showed the certainty of someone who believed they had uncovered obvious fraud. Maya maintained her professional tone and repeated her offer to contact Colonel Sarah Chun at Special Operations Command, but Brennan cut her off with a sharp gesture and declared he would handle verification through proper channels. His order came next, directing her to remain on base pending investigation, and he turned toward the door while instructing one of the accompanying officers to secure her equipment and ensure she didn't leave the compound. The tension in the medical bay shifted as Brennan strode out, leaving Maya standing beside the examination table with 2 junior officers who appeared uncomfortable with their assignment. She cooperated with the equipment inventory process, watching as they cataloged her rifle with its specialized thermal scope mount, her encrypted communication device with its secure satellite uplink, and her night vision equipment bearing serial numbers that traced to restricted procurement channels. The nurse returned to complete the medical evaluation with quick efficiency, noting minor lacerations and contusions that Maya waved off as routine contact injuries. Sergeant First Class David Torres observed the confrontation from his position on a medical cot 15 feet away, his broken wrist from a training accident giving him unexpected front row access to what appeared to be a significant command mistake. His years as an infantry non-commissioned officer had taught him to recognize genuine operator equipment and movement patterns, and everything about Maya spoke of advanced training and recent combat experience. The weapon Torres had glimpsed before the junior officers secured featured a suppressor configuration and optical setup that matched special operations loadouts he had seen during joint training exercises and Maya's immediate action drills, while responding to Brennan showed muscle memory built from hundreds of repetitions. Brennan returned to his office in the command post building and opened his computer to file an official report, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard as he documented what he termed a clear case of Special Forces impersonation. The report described Maya as a female claiming operator credentials without valid authentication, noted his decision to confine her to base pending verification, and recommended she be processed for fraudulent representation of military qualifications. He copied the report to the security office and the military police company, marked it with priority handling designation, then leaned back in his chair with the satisfaction of someone who believed they had protected unit integrity from an obvious threat. Maya walked across the compound toward the transient quarters under escort from a young military police sergeant who apologized quietly for the situation while maintaining his assigned duty. The quarters consisted of a converted storage building with 8 small rooms, each containing a metal-framed bed and wall locker, and Maya was assigned a room 4 with instructions to remain available for questioning. Her encrypted communication device had been confiscated along with her personal weapon, leaving her unable to contact Colonel Chun or her team members who were currently operating in a different sector. The door locked from the outside with a simple slide bolt, not quite confinement, but clearly not freedom, and Maya sat on the thin mattress considering her options while exhaustion from the combat mission finally began demanding rest. Torres spent the remainder of his medical observation time researching Special Forces female operators on his tablet, finding multiple verified sources confirming that women had been serving in special operations since the Pentagon lifted combat restrictions in 2016. The articles detailed selection courses, training pipelines, and combat deployments across multiple conflict zones, with several featuring interviews with female operators who described their experiences in direct action units. He cross-referenced Maya's unit designation against public special operations organizational charts and found Task Force 38 listed as an active element, though specific personnel and mission details remained classified above his access level. The base settled into evening routine as duty shifts changed and soldiers moved between work areas and dining facilities, unaware that a decorated Special Forces captain sat confined to transient quarters while the officer who imprisoned her filed paperwork, describing her as a fraud. Maya lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling's water stains, her mind reviewing the rescue mission and calculating how long it would take for her absence to trigger command attention. Colonel Chun would notice when Maya failed to check in after the scheduled mission completion window, probably within 12 hours, but the encrypted communication protocols meant Chun couldn't simply call the forward operating base and ask questions. The situation required patience and faith that the system would eventually correct Brennan's mistake, though Maya's experience suggested the correction might take longer than anyone would prefer. Torres returned to his barracks after medical release and opened his laptop to continue the research that had occupied his thoughts since witnessing the confrontation in the medical bay. His search focused on special operations equipment procurement, and he discovered that night vision devices carried specific serial number ranges that identified them as restricted issue items only available to special access programs. The memory of Maya's confiscated gear included a night vision monocular with a serial prefix that matched the restricted range, which meant her equipment had come through legitimate special operations channels rather than civilian purchase or standard military issue. The base communications office maintained archived radio logs from all tactical operations, and Torres uses network credentials to access recordings from the previous night's rescue mission. Maya's voice came through clearly on the encrypted channel, using authentication codes that change daily according to special compartmented information protocols, and her tactical language matched the precise brevity codes that special operations units employed during direct action. The medevac pilot's response acknowledged her command authority without hesitation, which suggested the authentication had passed multiple verification layers in real time during active combat operations. Torres walked to the security office and requested to review the equipment inventory list from Maya's confiscation, citing his role as a witness to the original confrontation. The duty officer provided a printed copy that detailed each item with serial numbers and technical specifications, and Torres photographed the list with his phone before returning it. The rifle configuration included a barrel length and rail system specific to special operations modification packages. The suppressor bore a manufacturing stamp used exclusively for government special access contracts, and the thermal scope carried a model number that civilian databases listed as restricted to military special operations forces. His next stop brought him to the base records office, where a clerk with database access agreed to search for Maya's personnel file after Torres explained his concern about potential command error. The clerk entered the name Captain Maya Reeves and her provided social security number, then frowned at the screen as the system returned a red banner with blocked text reading classification restricted special access required. The clerk tried alternate search parameters, including unit assignment and military occupational specialty, but each query produced the same restricted access message that indicated the file existed but remained locked behind security protocols above their clearance level. Colonel Patricia Hammond began her morning command brief at 0600 with routine reports on training schedules, maintenance status, and personnel movements across the forward operating base. The operations officer mentioned an unusual entry in the security log about a suspected Special Forces impersonator currently confined to transient quarters, and Hammond stopped in mid-sentence to request full details. The operations officer pulled up Brennan's report on the display screen, and Hammond read through it twice while her expression shifted from curiosity to concern as she noted the complete absence of any verification attempts through proper special operations channels. She dismissed the morning brief early and returned to her office to review the report in detail, finding that Brennan had observed Maya in combat gear, questioned her credentials, confiscated her equipment, and confined her to base without making a single contact to Special Operations Command. The report listed Maya's provided unit designation and classification level, but showed no record of Brennan calling those numbers or sending verification requests through the Joint Special Operations Task Force liaison that existed specifically for such situations. Hammond pulled up the base phone directory and located the direct line for the JSOC liaison office at Regional Command, her finger hovering over the dial button as she considered the implications of what appeared to be a significant breach of protocol. The call connected after 2 rings, and Hammond identified herself before explaining the situation with careful precision, providing Maya's name, unit designation, and the circumstances of her confinement. The JSOC liaison officer asked Hammond to hold while he accessed classified personnel databases, and the silence stretched for 90 seconds before he returned to the line with a tone that had shifted from routine inquiry to serious concern. He confirmed that Captain Maya Reeves was indeed assigned to Special Operations Task Force 38, that she currently held active special compartmented information clearance with additional protocols, and that her unit commander needed to be notified immediately about her detention. Hammond ended the call and sat back in her chair as the full scope of Brennan's error became clear, understanding that he had confined a legitimate Special Forces officer and confiscated classified equipment, without making even basic verification attempts. She pulled up the communication logs to check whether Brennan had contacted anyone at Special Operations Command and found his phone record showed 0 outgoing calls to JSOC, Special Operations Command, or any number associated with special access programs. The pattern suggested either gross negligence or deliberate refusal to verify credentials that contradicted his assumptions, and Hammond knew both possibilities required immediate investigation. Torres completed his equipment analysis and compiled his findings into a brief summary document that outlined the restricted serial numbers, the verified authentication codes from radio logs, and the classified file access restrictions that surrounded Maya's personnel record. He walked to Hammond's office and requested a meeting through her executive assistant, explaining that he had information relevant to the suspected impersonation case currently under review. The assistant checked Hammond's schedule and granted him 10 minutes at the end of the duty day. Hammond spent the afternoon reviewing base policies on credential verification and discovered that explicit guidance required commanders to contact issuing authorities before taking adverse action against personnel claiming specialized qualifications. The policy had been implemented 3 years earlier after a similar incident at another installation resulted in wrongful detention of a Navy explosive ordnance disposal technician, and it mandated direct communication with specialty commands within 4 hours of any credential dispute. Brennan's report showed he had confined Maya within 30 minutes of their confrontation and had now exceeded 30 hours without attempting verification, which placed him in clear violation of standing orders. Torres arrived at Hammond's office at precisely 1600 hours carrying his tablet with the compiled research, and he presented his findings with the methodical clarity of an experienced non-commissioned officer who understood how to brief commanders. Hammond listened without interruption as he walked through the equipment serial numbers, the radio authentication codes, and the restricted file access, then asked him to email her the complete documentation. She thanked him for his diligence and told him she would handle the matter personally, her tone carrying the weight of someone who recognized that a significant command failure was unfolding and required immediate correction before it caused irreparable damage to both Maya's career and the base's relationship with Special Operations Command. Torres spent his evening accessing the base archive system to review past credential disputes, searching for any pattern that might explain Brennan's failure to verify Maya's status through proper channels. The database returned 3 previous incidents over the past 18 months where female service members with specialized credentials had encountered problems under Brennan's command, and Torres opened each file to examine the circumstances and outcomes. The first case involved a Navy explosive ordnance disposal technician who had arrived for a joint training exercise in March of the previous year. And Brennan's report described her EOD qualification as likely a clerical error because female technicians were uncommon in the specialty. The second case appeared 6 months later when an Air Force combat controller reported to the base for liaison duties. Her advanced certification in close air support operations immediately questioned by Brennan despite her presentation of valid credentials and qualification records. His documentation suggested the combat controller had falsified her certification because the training pipeline was exceptionally difficult, and he found it improbable that a woman had completed it successfully. The third incident occurred just 4 months before Maya's arrival, involving a Marine Corps intelligence officer with top-secret clearance who had been assigned to brief-based leadership on threat assessments, and Brennan's written comments questioned how she really obtained that clearance level given her age and appearance. Torres photographed each case file with his phone and noted that none of the 3 incidents showed any attempt by Brennan to contact the Navy EOD School, the Air Force Combat Control Training Center, or the Marine Corps Intelligence Command to verify the credentials he questioned. Each woman had eventually been cleared after their home commands intervened directly, but the delays had ranged from 2 days to a full week, and all 3 files contained formal complaints about the hostile reception and assumption of fraud. The pattern became unmistakable as Torres reviewed the timeline, with each incident showing Brennan's immediate skepticism toward female service members holding advanced or specialized qualifications regardless of their documentation. Hammond received an encrypted message on her secure terminal at 0700 hours the next morning, the header identifying it as priority traffic from Joint Special Operations Command with authentication codes that required her immediate personal attention. She entered her access credentials and opened the message to find a terse paragraph confirming Captain Maya Reeves as an active Special Forces officer assigned to classified operations, noting that her current mission status was sensitive and requesting immediate release with full command support. The message included Colonel Sarah Chen's direct contact information and a note that Chun was departing for the forward operating base within the next 6 hours to address the situation personally. She pulled the 3 case files that Torres had documented and spread them across her desk, reviewing each incident with fresh perspective now that the pattern was explicit. The Navy EOD technician had provided her qualification card and offered contact information for her commanding officer, but Brennan's notes showed he had filed his report without making that call. The Air Force Combat Controller had presented her graduation certificate from the pipeline course along with 3 phone numbers for verification, yet Brennan had processed her as suspicious without contacting any of them. The Marine intelligence officer had arrived with orders signed by a 2-star general and had offered to wait while Brennan verified her clearance through proper channels. But he had instead restricted her movement and questioned her integrity. Hammond cross-referenced the dates and found that all 4 incidents had occurred after Brennan assumed command of his unit 14 months earlier, which meant the pattern was specific to his leadership rather than a broader base issue. She called the legal office and requested a staff judge advocate to review the cases for potential violations of equal opportunity policies and improper credential verification procedures. The attorney arrived within 30 minutes and spent an hour examining the files before concluding that the pattern demonstrated systematic failure to follow established protocols when dealing with female service members holding advanced qualifications. Torres received authorization from Hammond to contact the 3 previous victims and gather additional information about their experiences under Brennan's command, his status as the investigating non-commissioned officer, giving him official standing to request their cooperation. The Navy EOD technician answered her phone on the second ring and described her encounter with detailed clarity, explaining that Brennan had told her directly that her certification must be a clerical error, because someone like her could not have completed the training. She had filed a formal complaint through her chain of command, but the issue was resolved when her commanding officer contacted the base commander directly and threatened to escalate the matter to the Navy Inspector General. The Air Force Combat Controller responded to Torres's email within 2 hours with a detailed statement describing how Brennan had accused her of falsifying her qualification despite her valid credentials, claiming the training pipeline was too demanding for her to have succeeded legitimately. She had provided 3 separate phone numbers for verification, including her training squadron commander, but Brennan never called any of them and instead processed paperwork suggesting she be removed from the base for fraudulent representation. Her situation was resolved only when the Air Force Special Operations Wing commander personally flew to the installation and confronted Brennan about his failure to verify before taking action. The Marine intelligence officer sent a formal written statement through official channels after Torres contacted her command, and her account revealed the most concerning details of the pattern. Brennan had questioned how she really obtained her top-secret clearance, suggesting that someone must have pushed her through the process for reasons unrelated to her qualifications. When she offered to wait while he verified her status through the Defense Security Service, he had refused and instead confined her to a controlled area for 18 hours until her general officer sponsor contacted the base commander and demanded her immediate release. She had requested transfer from the base, citing hostile command climate and systematic credential dismissal as her reasons, and her transfer was approved within a week. Hammond compiled the information into a comprehensive briefing package that documented 4 separate incidents spanning 18 months, all involving female service members with legitimate advanced credentials, all resulting in Brennan's immediate skepticism and refusal to verify through proper channels. The pattern showed escalating severity from delayed verification to outright confinement, and the most recent incident with Maya involved not only detention but also confiscation of classified equipment and interruption of active special operations. She scheduled an immediate meeting with Brennan for 1,300 hours and prepared questions designed to determine whether his actions stemmed from negligence, bias, or deliberate misconduct. Torres completed his investigation report with methodical documentation of each finding, including photographs of the restricted equipment serial numbers, transcripts of the radio authentication codes, copies of the 3 previous case files, and statements from all 3 prior victims. The report ran to 47 pages with appendices and concluded that Brennan had violated base policy on credential verification in all 4 cases, demonstrated a clear pattern of discriminatory treatment toward female service members with advanced qualifications, and failed to follow explicit guidance requiring contact with issuing authorities before adverse action. Hammond reviewed the complete document and forwarded it to the JSOC liaison, the legal office, and the Regional Command Inspector General with a cover memorandum recommending immediate formal investigation. Hammond summoned Brennan to her headquarters office at precisely 1,300 hours, her tone during the phone call carrying none of the courtesy typically extended between field-grade officers. Brennan arrived 3 minutes early and stood before her desk while she remained seated, a deliberate reversal of military custom that signaled the serious nature of the meeting. She opened with a direct statement that Joint Special Operations Command had confirmed Captain Maya Reeves as a legitimate Special Forces officer currently assigned to classified operations, then asked Brennan to explain why he had made no verification attempts through proper channels before confining her to the base. Brennan shifted his weight and responded that he had prioritized unit security, claiming he could not risk operational security on unverified claims regardless of how convincing they might appear. Hammond slid a printed copy of the base policy across her desk, the highlighted section requiring commanders to contact issuing authorities within 4 hours of any credential dispute, and she asked him to explain why 36 hours had passed without a single phone call to Special Operations Command. His answer came more slowly as he stated that the situation had required careful consideration and that he planned to initiate verification once he had completed his preliminary investigation. Hammond opened the folder containing the 3 previous cases and placed each file in front of Brennan with deliberate precision, asking him why he had failed to verify credentials for the Navy EOD technician, the Air Force Combat Controller, and the Marine Intelligence Officer. Brennan glanced at the files and claimed that each case had presented reasonable doubt requiring security precautions, his voice taking on a defensive edge as he insisted he had followed proper protocols in protecting the base from potential fraud. Hammond pointed to the documentation in each file showing that all three women had provided direct contact information for verification, yet Brennan's phone records showed 0 calls to any of the numbers they had offered. His response shifted to procedural justifications as he argued that the verification process was complex and that he had delegated initial inquiries to his staff while maintaining oversight of the security situation. Hammond asked him to identify which staff members had made verification attempts and when those attempts occurred, but Brennan could not provide specific names or dates. She informed him that phone records from his unit showed no outgoing calls to the Navy EOD School, Air Force Combat Control Training Center, Marine Intelligence Command, or Joint Special Operations Command during any of the 4 incidents. Hammond leaned forward and asked the question directly, whether Brennan had made assumptions about these women's qualifications based on their gender rather than their documentation. His denial came immediately and with visible anger as he stated that gender had nothing to do with his security decisions and that he resented the implication of bias. She responded by reading aloud from his own reports, noting his written phrase that the EOD certification must be a clerical error, his statement that the combat controller qualification seemed improbable, his question about how the intelligence officer really obtained her clearance, and his description of Maya as claiming operator status. Each phrase revealed assumptions that the credentials were false before any verification attempt. Brennan's composure fractured as he argued that his experience informed his judgment and that unusual situations demanded heightened scrutiny. But Hammond cut him off by stating that his experience had led him to detain 4 legitimate service members and violate base policy in every case. She informed him that a formal investigation was opening into his conduct, that the Inspector General had already received the complete case file, and that his pattern of behavior suggested either systematic negligence or deliberate discrimination. His face reddened as he attempted to defend his actions, but Hammond raised her hand and told him the meeting was concluded. She issued orders for Maya's immediate release from confinement and the return of all confiscated equipment, directing the security office to process the release within 1 hour and to ensure Maya received a formal written apology for the improper detention. Brennan was instructed to have no further contact with Maya and to make himself available for questioning by the investigation board that would convene within 72 hours. Hammond dismissed him and watched as he left her office with stiff movements that betrayed his anger at being held accountable for decisions he clearly believed were justified. Maya received notification of her release at 1400 hours when a different military police sergeant arrived at the transient quarters and unlocked her door, explaining that the base commander had ordered her immediate release with full restoration of her equipment and movement privileges. She walked to the security office where a clerk processed her out with efficient silence, returning her rifle, encrypted communication device, night vision equipment, and personal weapon with all serial numbers verified against the original inventory list. Maya powered on the encrypted device and discovered unauthorized access attempts logged in the security file, 17 separate login failures using incorrect authentication codes over a 6-hour period. She examined the access log timestamps and cross-referenced them against the duty roster to determine who had attempted to breach her device, finding that the login attempts coincided with Brennan's shift in the command post. Maya pulled up the device's internal security protocols and discovered that each failed attempt had triggered an automatic alert to her unit's security officer, which meant Special Operations Command had known about the breach attempts within minutes of their occurrence. The encrypted device stored detailed forensic data about each unauthorized access, including the terminal identification number, and Maya photographed the log with her personal phone before reporting the security violation through official channels. Her call to Colonel Chun connected through the encrypted satellite link, and Maya provided a brief summary of the detention, the pattern of previous cases that Torres had uncovered, and the unauthorized access attempts on her classified device. Chin's response was immediate and unambiguous, stating that she was currently en route to the forward operating base with authorization from Special Operations Command to address the situation personally. Maya asked about the status of her team and their current operation, But Chen explained the discussion would need to wait for a secure facility and that Maya should prepare a complete timeline of events for formal documentation. Hammond received a priority message from the base security office reporting unauthorized access attempts on classified equipment. The forensic data identifying Brennan's command post terminal as the source. She immediately contacted the staff judge advocate and requested guidance on whether the unauthorized access constituted a criminal violation under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and the attorney confirmed that accessing or attempting to access classified information without proper authorization met the definition of several potential offenses. Hammond ordered the security office to preserve all forensic evidence and to restrict Brennan's access to classified systems pending completion of the investigation. Brennan returned to his office and discovered that his classified computer terminal had been locked with a security override, the screen displaying a message directing him to contact the base security manager. His phone call produced terse instructions to report immediately to the security office for debriefing about unauthorized system access, and Brennan's protests that he had done nothing wrong were met with professional silence. The security manager showed him the forensic logs from Maya's device and asked him to explain why his terminal had attempted to access classified materials without proper authentication, but Brennan could offer no explanation beyond claiming he had been conducting a legitimate investigation into suspected fraud. Hammond convened a formal investigation board at 0800 hours the following morning, assigning 3 senior officers, including Torres, to review all 4 credential dismissal cases and to examine Brennan's conduct for potential violations of military law and regulation. The board assembled in a secure conference room with access to classified personnel databases, forensic evidence from the unauthorized access attempts, and statements from all involved parties. Hammond directed them to complete a preliminary assessment within 48 hours due to the sensitivity of Special Operations Command involvement and the potential for broader policy implications. Torres began the board's work by reviewing security footage from the Base Network Operations Center, discovering that Brennan had entered the secure facility at 2200 hours on the night of Maya's detention using his authorized access card. The timestamp log showed he spent 47 minutes inside the facility, and the computer access records revealed he had attempted to open Maya's encrypted device file 17 times using various combinations of standard military passwords. Each failed attempt triggered automatic security alerts that were routed to Special Operations Command headquarters, creating a documented trail of unauthorized access that met the legal definition of attempted compromise of classified materials. The board pulled Brennan's original reports on all 4 cases and compared his written statements against the actual evidence available at the time of each incident. The Navy EOD technician's case showed that Brennan had described her credentials as questionable despite her presentation of a valid qualification card with holographic security features and a current expiration date. His report claimed he needed time to verify the certification through proper channels, but phone records proved he never contacted the Navy EOD school during the 3 days she remained under movement restrictions. The Air Force Combat Controller case revealed more concerning patterns as the board examined Brennan's documentation, claiming the qualification seemed improbable given the difficulty of the training pipeline. His written justification suggested that successful completion of the course was uncommon enough to warrant skepticism. Yet he had made no attempt to contact any of the 3 phone numbers she provided for immediate verification. The combat controller's commanding officer had eventually bypassed Brennan entirely and contacted Hammond's predecessor to demand his service member's release, noting in official correspondence that the delay had disrupted planned training operations. Hammond received notification that Colonel Chun had arrived at the forward operating base and was requesting immediate meeting with base leadership to discuss the detention of her officer. She arranged a conference in her office at 1100 hours and prepared a comprehensive briefing package documenting the investigation findings, the pattern of previous cases, and a security violation involving unauthorized access to classified equipment. Chen arrived accompanied by a lieutenant colonel from Special Operations Command Legal Office and a senior enlisted advisor, their presence signaling that this meeting carried formal weight beyond routine coordination. Chun entered Hammond's office and accepted the offered seat with the controlled bearing of someone accustomed to high-stakes operations where composure determined outcomes. Hammond opened by presenting a formal apology for the improper detention of Captain Reeves and outlined the immediate actions taken, including her release, equipment return, and the investigation board examining Brennan's conduct. Chun listened without interruption as Hammond described the pattern of 4 incidents over 18 months, all involving female service members with advanced credentials, and all showing Brennan's refusal to verify through proper channels. The legal officer from Special Operations Command reviewed the forensic evidence of unauthorized access attempts and asked specific questions about the classified information stored on Maya's device, determining that the attempted breach involved operational planning data, personnel identities, and mission protocols that could compromise ongoing special access programs. Hammond provided the complete security log showing Brennan's terminal identification, the 17 failed login attempts, and the automatic alerts that triggered Special Operations Command notification. The legal officer made notes and stated that the unauthorized access alone constituted multiple violations of federal law regarding classified information handling. Torres presented the investigation board's preliminary findings during the meeting, documenting Brennan's pattern of filing false reports that claimed verification was pending or ongoing when phone records proved no verification attempt occurred. The board had discovered that Brennan had instructed his administrative staff to delay processing verification requests from female service members, creating an artificial backlog that justified extended restrictions, while making it appear he was following procedures. 2 staff members had provided statements describing how Brennan directed them to find reasons to question credentials presented by women while processing male service members' qualifications without additional scrutiny. Chun asked whether any of the 4 cases had resulted in operational impacts beyond the individual service members affected, and Hammond explained that the Air Force Combat Controller's detention had delayed a joint training exercise involving close air support coordination, costing the base 48 hours of scheduled operations. The Marine Intelligence Officer's restriction had prevented delivery of time-sensitive threat briefings that were subsequently delivered 3 days late through alternate channels. Maya's detention had interrupted her return to ongoing special operations that required immediate personnel reconstitution after the combat rescue mission. The senior enlisted advisor from Special Operations Command spoke directly about the broader implications of Brennan's conduct, noting that special operations personnel often worked in ambiguous environments where their credentials and authorities were not immediately obvious to conventional forces. The entire system of special access programs depended on proper verification procedures when questions arose, and Brennan's pattern of refusing to verify while simultaneously detaining personnel created serious operational security risks. If personnel could not trust that proper identification would be verified rather than dismissed, the fundamental relationship between special operations and conventional forces would erode. Hammond asked Chun what outcomes Special Operations Command was seeking from the investigation, and Chun's response was unambiguous in its directness. She wanted Brennan held fully accountable under military law for the unauthorized access to classified materials, for filing false official statements in all 4 cases, and for the pattern of discrimination that violated equal opportunity regulations. She requested that the base implement mandatory training on credential verification procedures and establish a direct liaison position with Special Operations Command to prevent future incidents. Most importantly, she wanted the 3 previous victims contacted and offered remediation for the career impacts they had suffered from wrongful credential dismissal. The meeting concluded with Hammond committing to complete the investigation board's work within 48 hours and to forward all findings to the Regional Command Legal Office for court-martial consideration. She agreed to establish the Special Operations Liaison position immediately and to begin development of enhanced verification training for all base personnel. Chun stated that she would remain at the forward operating base until the initial accountability measures were in place and that she expected regular updates on the investigation progress. Maya met with Chun privately after the command meeting to provide her detailed timeline of events from the combat rescue through the detention and release. Chun reviewed the encrypted device logs showing the unauthorized access attempts and confirmed that Special Operations Command security personnel had been monitoring the situation since the first breach attempt triggered their alerts. She explained that the delay in her arrival had been necessary to gather complete documentation and to coordinate with legal authorities about the proper approach to accountability, but that Maya's welfare and the unit's operational capability had remained a priority throughout. Chun requested a formal command conference at 1400 hours with all senior base leadership present. Her authority as a Special Operations Task Force commander, giving her standing to convene such a meeting despite being a visiting officer. Hammond assembled her staff in the main briefing room, where Chun stood at the podium with Maya seated in the front row, the arrangement deliberately positioning the wrongfully detained officer in clear view of everyone who would hear the full accounting of Brennan's failures. Chun began by introducing herself as Commander of Special Operations Task Force 38 with operational authority across 3 combat theaters and oversight of 73 special operators conducting classified missions. She presented Maya's operational record on the projection screen, the sanitized version showing 47 combat missions over 4 years without revealing specific locations or target details that remained above the audience's clearance level. 3 Valor citations appeared as formal certificates with redacted mission descriptions, but the awards themselves told the story of extraordinary performance under fire across multiple deployments. Chun described the rescue mission that had preceded Maya's detention, explaining that 6 soldiers owed their lives to her decision to insert into active combat despite enemy fire hitting the helicopter during approach, and that Corporal Jenkins would have bled out within minutes if Maya had not applied the tourniquet with surgical precision under continuing fire. The timeline appeared next on the screen, showing Maya's arrival at the medical facility at 0645 hours, covered in blood from treating casualties. Her provision of unit designation and classification level to Major Brennan at 0700 hours, and his immediate dismissal of her credentials without any verification attempt. Chun highlighted the 3 phone numbers Maya had offered for immediate contact with Special Operations Command, noting that any of them would have confirmed her identity within 5 minutes through automated authentication protocols. Brennan's decision to confiscate her equipment and confine her to quarters occurred at 0730 hours, just 45 minutes after her return from saving 6 lives in direct combat action. Chun paused and asked the assembled officers whether any of them could identify a legitimate security reason for refusing to make a 5-minute phone call that would verify or disprove a service member's claimed credentials. The silence in the briefing room carried weight as senior leaders recognized that no reasonable explanation existed for Brennan's refusal to verify when verification was immediately available. She continued by presenting the 3 previous cases with similar timelines, showing female service members offering verification contact information and Brennan declining to use it, while simultaneously restricting their movement and questioning their integrity. Brennan sat in the back row with his arms crossed, his expression showing the rigid defensiveness of someone who believed the entire proceeding was political theater designed to scapegoat him for reasonable security decisions. Chun shifted her presentation to address his attempted justifications directly, displaying his written report claiming he needed to prioritize unit security and could not risk operational security on unverified claims. She asked the legal officer to explain why that justification failed on multiple levels, and the lieutenant colonel stood to outline how refusing to verify actually created greater security risks by leaving potentially legitimate personnel in legal limbo, while genuine threats would be encouraged by evidence that verification could be avoided through simple denial. Hammond added context about the base policy requiring verification within 4 hours of any credential dispute, policy that had been briefed to all commanders, including Brennan, during their initial orientation 14 months earlier. The policy existed specifically because previous incidents at other installations had demonstrated that commanders who refused to verify credentials often did so based on personal bias rather than legitimate security concerns. Chun presented phone records showing that Brennan had made 0 calls to any credentialing authority during any of the 4 incidents despite having direct access to global military phone directories and secure communication systems that would have connected him to the appropriate verification offices within seconds. The forensic evidence from the unauthorized access attempts appeared on screen, with technical details showing Brennan's command post terminal identification number, the 17 failed login attempts using incorrect passwords, and the automatic security alerts that triggered Special Operations Command notification. Chen explained that Maya's encrypted device contained operational planning data for ongoing missions involving multiple special operators whose identities and locations were protected under special access programs, and that Brennan's breach attempts could have compromised those operations if he had succeeded in accessing the files. The legal officer noted that attempted unauthorized access to classified information carried potential federal criminal charges beyond the military justice violations. Chen described how Special Operations Command security personnel had monitored the breach attempts in real time and had immediately begun documenting evidence for potential prosecution, recognizing that the attempts suggested either extraordinary incompetence regarding classified material handling or deliberate effort to compromise special access programs. The security protocols on Maya's device had prevented any actual data exposure, but the intent to access materials beyond Brennan's clearance level was clear from his repeated attempts using different password combinations. Each failed attempt had logged his terminal location, timestamp, and the specific files he tried to open, creating an unambiguous record of unauthorized access that would support criminal charges if the command chose to pursue them. Brennan requested permission to speak and attempted to explain that he had been conducting a legitimate investigation into suspected fraud, but Chen cut him off by asking why investigating suspected fraud required accessing classified operational files rather than simply calling the phone numbers provided for verification. His response stumbled as he claimed he needed to understand the full scope of the potential security breach before contacting outside agencies. But the legal officer interjected that his explanation described exactly the wrong approach to security verification and suggested fundamental misunderstanding of classified material handling procedures. Hammond presented the statements from Brennan's administrative staff, describing his instructions to delay verification requests from female service members while processing male credentials without additional scrutiny. 2 staff members had documented specific instances where Brennan directed them to find procedural reasons to question qualifications presented by women, suggesting their certifications might be errors or that additional authentication was needed beyond standard verification. One staff member had refused to follow the instruction and was subsequently given a negative performance evaluation, correlation that the investigation board found constituted potential retaliation for refusing to participate in discriminatory practices. Chun concluded her presentation by stating Special Operations Command's position that Brennan's conduct had endangered classified operations, violated federal laws regarding classified information handling, demonstrated systematic discrimination against female service members, and created hostile command climate that drove at least one qualified Marine intelligence officer to request transfer from a base. She recommended immediate relief from command pending court-martial for false official statements and unauthorized access to classified materials, suspension of his security clearance, and formal investigation into whether his staff members should face administrative separation for enabling his discriminatory pattern. The base staff judge advocate stood and confirmed that the evidence supported court-martial charges on multiple specifications, including violation of Article 92 for dereliction of duty and failing to verify credentials as required by policy, violation of Article 107 for false official statements in all 4 incident reports, and violation of Article 92 for attempted unauthorized access to classified information. Additional charges under federal statutes regarding classified material handling remained under consideration pending review by the Regional Command Legal Office and the Department of Justice. Hammond announced her decision to formally relieve Brennan of command effective immediately, to suspend his security clearance pending investigation completion, and to restrict him to the base under legal supervision while charges were prepared and reviewed. She directed the provost marshal to take custody of Brennan's access credentials and to ensure he had no further contact with classified materials or systems. Brennan stood as military police approached his seat, his face showing the recognition that his career had ended in the briefing room, where he had expected to defend his decisions as reasonable security measures. Hammond convened an emergency staff meeting at 0600 hours the morning after Brennan's relief, her priority shifting from accountability to immediate institutional reform that would prevent similar incidents from occurring at her installation or spreading to other bases in the region. She directed her operations officer to conduct a complete review of all credential verification procedures currently in use and to identify every point where human judgment could override mandatory verification requirements. The legal office received tasking to draft new standing orders that would make verification through proper channels the only acceptable response to any credential dispute, with explicit prohibition against detention or adverse action before verification was complete. The security office began a systematic investigation of Brennan's 3 administrative staff members who had assisted in preventing complaint processing and enabling the discriminatory pattern to continue over 18 months. 2 sergeants and 1 civilian personnel specialist were placed on administrative leave while investigators reviewed their email communications, duty logs, and personnel actions to determine the extent of their involvement. The lead investigator discovered that the civilian specialist had maintained a separate tracking spreadsheet documenting credential disputes, with notations showing gender of the service member and outcome of each case, creating evidence that the pattern was recognized and tracked rather than coincidental. Hammond contacted the commands of the 3 previous victims to provide complete investigation findings and to request their assistance in offering remediation for the career impacts their service members had suffered from wrongful credential dismissal. The Navy Yoti Command responded within 2 hours, stating that the technician had filed a complaint about the incident that was never fully investigated, and requesting that Hammond provide a formal written apology along with correction of any negative documentation that might exist in her service record. The Air Force Special Operations Wing commander confirmed that his combat controller had lost 48 hours of critical training time and had submitted a statement describing the incident as evidence of gender discrimination, but that her complaint had been marked as unsubstantiated due to lack of supporting documentation. The Marine Corps Intelligence Command provided the most concerning response, explaining that their officer had requested and received transfer specifically to escape what she described as systematic hostility toward female service members with advanced qualifications. Her transfer request included detailed descriptions of Brennan's conduct and the response from his staff when she attempted to file a formal complaint, noting that she was told the complaint process would take months to complete and might negatively impact her future assignments. The Marine colonel who had approved her transfer requested a phone call with Hammond to discuss whether the base had systemic issues beyond Brennan's individual actions. Torres completed the investigation board's final report with comprehensive documentation of policy violations, false official statements, unauthorized access attempts, and the discriminatory pattern that affected 4 verified cases over 18 months. The report included 47 distinct findings of facts supported by documentary evidence, witness statements, and forensic data from computer systems. His analysis concluded that Brennan's conduct violated multiple provisions of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, federal regulations regarding classified information handling, and Department of Defense equal opportunity policies. The report recommended court-martial proceedings, administrative separation of the 3 staff members who enabled the pattern, and immediate implementation of enhanced verification training for all base personnel. Hammond forwarded the complete investigation report to the Regional Command Legal Office with a cover memorandum stating her assessment that the evidence supported criminal prosecution for false official statements and attempted unauthorized access to classified materials. She requested guidance on whether to pursue charges under federal statutes in addition to military justice provisions, noting that the unauthorized access attempts involved special access program materials that triggered specific federal protections. The regional legal officer responded that the case merited review by Department of Justice prosecutors specializing in classified information violations, and that military charges should proceed in parallel with federal review. The base legal office filed formal court-martial charges against Brennan with specifications detailing 4 separate incidents of false official statements, 1 count of dereliction of duty for systematic failure to follow credential verification policies, and 3 specifications of attempted unauthorized access to classified information. Each specification included detailed supporting evidence with document references, witness lists, and forensic data establishing beyond reasonable doubt that Brennan had committed the alleged offenses. The charges were forwarded to the convening authority at Regional Command with a recommendation for general court-martial due to the severity of the offenses and their impact on special operations security. Hammond issued a base-wide directive establishing new credential verification procedures that required immediate database checks through appropriate specialty commands whenever any service member presented advanced or specialized qualifications. The directive prohibited any adverse action, including movement restrictions, equipment confiscation, or negative documentation before verification was complete, with explicit statement that commanders who violated the requirement would face relief and potential charges. Every credential dispute now required notification to the base commander's office within 1 hour, creating command oversight that would prevent individual commanders from implementing discriminatory practices without immediate detection. Chun established the Special Operations Liaison Office in a dedicated space within the base headquarters complex, assigning a senior Special Forces warrant officer to serve as the permanent liaison between conventional forces and special operations units operating in the region. The liaison's responsibilities included immediate response to any credential verification questions, coordination of special operations personnel movements through the base, and monthly briefings to base leadership about special operations integration best practices. Hammond provided the liaison with direct access to her command team and with authority to escalate any credential disputes directly to her office regardless of time or circumstances. The Provost Marshal completed processing of Brennan's restriction to base under legal supervision, confiscating his government travel card, placing his personal vehicle under movement control, and assigning him to a monitoring program that required twice-daily check-ins with military police. His security clearance suspension was formally documented in multiple databases to ensure he could not access classified spaces or materials at any Department of Defense facility. The legal office assigned him a military defense counsel and scheduled his initial court-martial hearing for 30 days out, allowing time for discovery and preparation of his defense. Maya met with Hammond privately to receive a formal written apology from base command acknowledging that her detention had been improper and that the base had failed to follow established verification procedures. Hammond expressed personal regret that a decorated Special Forces officer had been treated as a fraud after conducting a heroic combat rescue, and she committed to ensuring that Maya's service record would reflect only the combat action and none of the wrongful detention. Maya accepted the apology with professional courtesy and stated that her primary concern was systemic reform to protect other special operations personnel from similar treatment in the future. The 3 administrative staff members who had enabled Brennan's discriminatory pattern faced administrative separation boards after the investigation revealed their active participation in delaying verification requests and preventing complaint processing. The civilian personnel specialist received termination notice for cause based on evidence that she had maintained the discriminatory tracking spreadsheet and had advised Brennan on how to document credential disputes in ways that appeared procedurally sound while actually violating policy. The two sergeants faced reduction in rank and administrative separation for following unlawful orders without reporting the discriminatory pattern to higher authority as required by equal opportunity regulations. Hammond convened a mandatory training session for all base personnel, focusing on credential verification requirements, unconscious bias recognition, and the operational importance of proper integration between conventional and special operations forces. The training included case studies from the 4 incidents at her base, along with examples from other installations where similar failures had occurred. Special emphasis was placed on the security risks created when verification was refused, noting that legitimate special operations personnel left in limbo created gaps in operational coverage, while potential threats were encouraged by evidence that credentials could be questioned indefinitely without resolution. Torres received a commendation from Hammond for his diligent investigation work that had uncovered the pattern of discrimination and provided the evidence necessary for accountability and reform. She assigned him to the working group developing the enhanced verification training curriculum, recognizing that his investigative experience and attention to detail would ensure the training addressed actual failure points rather than generic policy review. His role expanded to include oversight of credential verification compliance, with authority to audit any credential dispute and report directly to the base commander if proper procedures were not followed. Maya prepared to return to her Special Forces unit with her encrypted communication device and equipment restored, her mission reports remaining classified, and her confidence that the base had implemented meaningful reforms. Chun arranged for military transport to return Maya to her team's operational location, as she provided Hammond with direct contact information for immediate coordination if any future issues arose involving special operations personnel at the forward operating base. Maya met with Hammond in her private office 3 days after Brennan's relief to receive formal documentation clearing her service record of any reference to the wrongful detention and acknowledging her combat action during the rescue mission. Hammond presented a command commendation recognizing Maya's professionalism throughout the incident, noting that she had maintained military bearing and cooperation despite being subjected to improper confinement and having her credentials questioned after saving 6 lives under fire. The commendation would become part of Maya's permanent record and would serve as official documentation that the base command recognized the injustice she had experienced. Chun established operational protocols for the Special Operations Liaison Office that created direct communication channels between Special Operations units and the forward operating base, ensuring that any future personnel movements or credential questions would be resolved through proper verification rather than individual commander judgment. The liaison warrant officer received access to classified personnel databases that could confirm Special Operations credentials within minutes, eliminating the verification delays that had characterized Brennan's handling of previous cases. Hammond attended the liaison office opening ceremony and publicly committed her command to supporting special operations integration through proper procedures and mutual respect. The Navy Explosive Ordnance Disposal Technician received a formal apology letter from Hammond, along with documentation correcting her service record to remove any reference to the credential dispute that had delayed her participation in the joint training exercise 18 months earlier. Her commanding officer contacted Hammond to express appreciation for the remediation and to request a phone call discussing lessons learned that might be shared across the Navy Yodi community. The technician provided a statement for the investigation record describing how the incident had caused her to question whether her qualifications would be respected at other installations, creating lasting doubt about whether the military truly valued female service members in specialized roles. Hammond contacted the Air Force Combat Controller's Wing Commander to provide complete investigation findings and to offer formal remediation for the training time lost and the unsubstantiated complaint that had remained in her file. The Wing Commander explained that his service member had considered leaving the Air Force after the incident, believing that her credentials would be questioned repeatedly regardless of their validity, and that only intervention from senior leadership had convinced her to remain in service. Hammond arranged for the combat controller to visit the base and receive a personal apology along with a briefing on the systemic reforms implemented to prevent future incidents, hoping that direct engagement would demonstrate genuine institutional change. The Marine Corps intelligence officer who had transferred to escape hostile command climate received outreach from Hammond requesting permission to discuss remediation options and to learn from her experience about how the base had failed to protect her from discrimination. The Marine officer agreed to a video conference and described in detailed terms how Brennan's questioning of her top-secret clearance had undermined her credibility with the unit she was assigned to brief, creating operational impacts beyond the personal offense. She explained that requesting transfer had felt like the only option because filing complaints through Brennan's chain of command had produced no results, and that she had assumed the discrimination was tolerated or even encouraged by senior leadership. Hammond listened to the Marine officer's account and acknowledged that the base had failed in its responsibility to maintain equal opportunity and to protect service members from discriminatory treatment by their commanders. She offered to provide formal documentation clearing the Marines' record of any negative references related to the credential dispute, to write a letter to her current command explaining the circumstances of her transfer request and affirming that it resulted from the base's failure rather than any deficiency on her part, and to invite her back to the base to see the reforms implemented in response to the investigation. The Marine officer accepted the documentation offers, but declined the invitation to return, stating that the emotional impact of the experience made revisiting the location undesirable despite appreciation for the accountability efforts. Chun conducted a briefing session for base leadership on special operations integration principles, emphasizing that special operations personnel often worked in environments where their credentials and authorities were not immediately obvious to conventional forces and that the entire system depended on proper verification when questions arose. She presented statistics showing that special operations units included significant numbers of female operators across multiple specialties, including Special Forces, Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, and Air Force Special Tactics, and that assumptions about who could hold these qualifications based on gender or appearance created security risks by encouraging hostile actors to exploit those assumptions. The briefing included examples of female special operations personnel whose ambiguous appearance had enabled successful operations precisely because adversaries shared the same discriminatory assumptions that Brennan had demonstrated. Torres completed development of the Enhanced Credential Verification Training Curriculum with modules covering unconscious bias recognition, proper verification procedures, operational security implications of verification delays, and case studies from multiple installations where credential disputes had been handled correctly or incorrectly. The curriculum required commanders to complete scenario-based exercises where they had to determine proper responses to various credential presentations, with immediate feedback identifying policy violations and security risks created by improper handling. Hammond mandated the training for all personnel in leadership positions and established quarterly refresher requirements to maintain awareness and prevent policy drift over time. The Special Operations Liaison Office processed its first verification request within 72 hours of opening, when a Special Forces team sergeant arrived at the base for coordination meetings and was questioned by a gate guard about his credentials. The liaison warrant officer received immediate notification through the new procedures, contacted the team sergeant's unit within 3 minutes to confirm his identity and authorization, and provided written verification to the gate guard within 5 minutes of the initial question. The team sergeant entered the base without delay or detention, and the liaison documented the case as an example of proper procedure execution that contrasted sharply with Brennan's historical pattern of refusal to verify. Meyer returned to her Special Forces unit and briefed her team members on the incident and its resolution, her account focusing on the importance of proper credential verification procedures and the systemic reforms that had resulted from the investigation. Her team commander incorporated the lessons into their pre-deployment training, emphasizing that special operations personnel should expect proper verification when working with conventional forces and should immediately escalate through their chain of command if verification was refused or delayed beyond reasonable time frames. The incident became a case study within Special Operations Command about the intersection of gender discrimination and operational security, used to train both special operations personnel and conventional force liaisons about proper integration protocols. Hammond received notification from the Regional Command Legal Office that Brennan's court-martial was scheduled to proceed in 45 days with a military judge assigned and a panel of senior officers selected to hear the case. The charges have been refined based on legal review to focus on the strongest evidence, including 4 specifications of false official statements supported by documentary proof that he had claimed verification was ongoing when no verification attempts had been made. The unauthorized access charges included forensic evidence showing 17 distinct attempts to breach Maya's encrypted device using his command post terminal, with each attempt logged and timestamped in ways that eliminated any possibility of accident or mistake. The 3 administrative staff members who had enabled Brennan's discriminatory pattern appeared before separation boards that reviewed evidence of their participation in delaying verification requests and preventing complaint processing. The civilian personnel specialist termination was upheld based on the discriminatory tracking spreadsheet and her documented advice to Brennan about how to structure his reports to avoid triggering equal opportunity reviews. The 2 sergeants received reductions in rank and were separated from service with general discharges under honorable conditions, the board finding that while they had followed unlawful orders, they had also failed in their responsibility to report the discriminatory pattern to higher authority as required by regulation. Hammond implemented automated credential verification alerts in the base personnel system that would flag any credential dispute and automatically notify both the base commander's office and the appropriate specialty command within 1 hour of documentation. The system prevented commanders from delaying verification by creating automatic timelines and escalation paths that removed discretion from the process. Every credential dispute now generated a case file that tracked verification attempts, response times, and outcomes, creating transparency that would make discriminatory patterns immediately visible to oversight authorities. Hammond briefed the regional command staff 6 weeks after Brennan's relief, presenting the forward operating base case as an example of how systematic credential verification failures could create security vulnerabilities and undermine special operations integration across an entire theater. The regional commander listened to her presentation detailing the 4 documented incidents, the 18-month pattern of discrimination, and the unauthorized access to classified materials that had triggered federal law enforcement interest. He directed his chief of staff to order a comprehensive audit of credential verification procedures at all 17 bases under regional command authority, with specific focus on identifying any similar patterns of refusal to verify when proper channels were readily available. The audit teams deployed to each installation within 72 hours, their mandate requiring review of all credential disputes from the previous 3 years and examination of policies, training records, and commander responses to specialized qualification presentations. The teams discovered 8 additional cases across 4 different bases where female service members with advanced credentials had faced delays, questioning, or adverse action before verification was completed through proper channels. None of the additional cases matched the severity of Brennan's systematic pattern, but all demonstrated that improper credential verification was a theater-wide issue rather than an isolated incident at Hammond's base. Torres received assignment to the regional audit team based on his investigation work and his development of the enhanced verification training curriculum, his role expanding from base-level oversight to theater-wide policy development. He traveled to each installation to review their credential dispute cases and to assess whether their current procedures included adequate safeguards against discriminatory application of verification requirements. His reports identified common failure points, including lack of direct access to specialty command verification offices, insufficient training on unconscious bias recognition, and absence of automated alerts that would escalate credential disputes to senior leadership attention. The Pentagon Special Operations Liaison Office requested copies of the complete investigation file from Hammond's base after receiving reports from multiple theater commands about similar credential verification failures affecting special operations personnel. A colonel from a joint staff reviewed the forensic evidence of Brennan's unauthorized access attempts and the pattern of false official statements, then recommended that the case be used as the basis for service-wide policy guidance on proper verification procedures. The Department of Defense Equal Opportunity Office independently requested the investigation files for use in developing training materials about how gender discrimination could manifest in military contexts beyond traditional harassment or exclusion. Hammond received notification that her base had been selected as the test location for implementing new theater-wide verification protocols based on the comprehensive reforms she had developed in response to the investigation findings. The protocols required three-step verification for any specialized credential, including immediate database check against the issuing authority's records, direct phone contact with the credentialing command to confirm current status, and completion of all verification within 24 hours with automatic escalation if timelines were not met. The protocols explicitly prohibited any adverse action, including movement restrictions, equipment confiscation, or negative documentation before verification was complete. The regional commander visited Hammond's base 2 months after the investigation, concluded to observe the Special Operations Liaison Office in operation, and to meet with Torres about the enhanced verification training that would be implemented theater-wide. He attended a demonstration of the automated credential verification system that flagged disputes, tracked verification attempts, and generated alerts if proper procedures were not followed within required timelines. The system had processed 14 verification requests since implementation, with average resolution time of 4 hours and 0 cases where commanders attempted to bypass proper procedures, demonstrating that automation combined with command oversight could effectively prevent discriminatory application of verification requirements. Chen returned to the forward operating bays for a follow-up assessment of the reforms implemented after Maya's detention, her evaluation focusing on whether the changes had created lasting institutional improvements or merely temporary compliance driven by scrutiny from the investigation. She interviewed base personnel at multiple levels, including gate guards who would be first to encounter special operations credentials, operations center staff who coordinated movements, and commanders who held authority to question qualifications. Her assessment concluded that the reforms had fundamentally changed the base culture regarding credential verification, with personnel now viewing immediate verification as a security requirement rather than an optional courtesy. The Navy Explosive Ordnance Disposal Technician, who had been the first of Brennan's 4 victims, returned to Hammond's base for follow-up joint training exercises. Her willingness to return serving as evidence that the remediation efforts and institutional reforms had restored her confidence in the installation's commitment to equal opportunity. She met privately with Hammond to discuss her experience since receiving the formal apology and service record correction, noting that knowing the base had held personnel accountable and implemented systemic changes had been crucial to her decision to participate in future training there. Her commanding officer observed the training week and reported back to Navy Yodi Command that the base now demonstrated professional integration practices worthy of being used as a model for other installations. The Air Force Combat Controller accepted Hammond's invitation to visit the base and receive a personal briefing on the reforms implemented in response to the investigation that had included her case. Hammond arranged for her to meet with the Special Operations Liaison Officer to observe the automated verification system in operation, and to participate in delivering a portion of the enhanced credential verification training to base leadership. The combat controller's direct testimony about how Brennan's refusal to verify her qualifications had undermined her professional credibility proved powerful in conveying to commanders the operational impacts of improper credential verification beyond the personal offense to the affected service member. Torres completed implementation of the enhanced verification training across all 17 bases in the regional command, his curriculum adapted for each installation's specific operational environment, while maintaining core principles about proper procedures and unconscious bias recognition. Post-training assessments showed significant improvement in commander knowledge of verification requirements and in recognition of how discriminatory assumptions could compromise both equal opportunity and operational security. The training included mandatory scenario exercises where commanders had to demonstrate proper response to credential presentations, with immediate remediation required for anyone who indicated they would take adverse action before verification was complete. Hammond received recognition from the regional commander for her rapid implementation of comprehensive reforms that had transformed a command failure into a model for theater-wide policy development. Her promotion board evaluation included specific commendation for holding subordinate leaders accountable for discriminatory conduct while simultaneously addressing systemic issues that had enabled the pattern to persist. The regional commander directed that her base's verification protocols be documented as the theater standard and that all installations adopt similar procedures within 90 days. The Special Operations Liaison Office expanded its mission beyond simple credential verification to include monthly integration briefings for base personnel about special operations capabilities, selection processes, and the diversity of personnel serving in special operations across all service branches. The briefings helped demystify special operations work and provided concrete information about female operators' roles and qualifications, directly addressing the knowledge gaps that had enabled Brennan's discriminatory assumptions to appear reasonable to personnel who lacked exposure to actual special operations personnel composition. Attendance at the briefings became mandatory for all newly assigned commanders and for personnel in positions that required interaction with special operations units. Maya's case became part of the Special Operations Command Cultural Awareness curriculum used during pre-deployment training for conventional forces assigned to work with special operations units. The scenario presenting her credentials being questioned and asking participants to identify proper verification procedures and potential consequences of verification failure. The training emphasized that special operations personnel came in many forms that did not match popular media stereotypes, and that commanders who made assumptions based on appearance or gender rather than following verification procedures created security risks that could compromise ongoing operations. The automated credential verification system implemented at Hammond's base was adopted as the regional standard and scheduled for deployment across all 147 installations in the combatant command area of operations. The system's automatic alerts and escalation protocols prevented commanders from delaying verification, while its transparency made discriminatory patterns immediately visible to oversight authorities, creating both technical safeguards and accountability mechanisms that addressed the dual requirements of security and equal opportunity. Implementation teams trained personnel at each installation on system operation and on the policy requirements that the system enforced through automated compliance monitoring. 6 months after Brennan's relief from command, Hammond reviewed the base metrics showing sustained compliance with the new verification protocols and zero credential dismissal incidents since implementation of the automated system. The Special Operations Liaison Office had processed 23 verification requests during that period with an average resolution time of 3 hours and 40 minutes, well within the 24-hour maximum timeline, and every case had been resolved through proper channels without any service member facing adverse action before verification was complete. The data demonstrated that the reforms had become embedded in base operations rather than temporary adjustments driven by investigation scrutiny. Torres completed a comprehensive analysis of theater-wide verification compliance across all 17 bases that had implemented the enhanced protocols. His report documenting 211 credential verifications processed through proper channels during the 6-month measurement period. The analysis showed that 40 of those verifications involved female service members with specialized qualifications, and that all 40 cases have been resolved professionally without delays, questioning, or adverse action. Torres estimated that the new protocols had prevented approximately 40 potential incidents similar to those that had occurred under Brennan's command, calculating the estimate based on historical patterns and the frequency of female service members with advanced credentials transiting through theater installations. Maya returned to Hammond's forward operating base for a joint training evolution involving integration between conventional forces and special forces direct action teams. her willingness to work again at the installation that had wrongfully detained her serving as evidence that the reforms had restored trust between special operations and conventional commands. Personnel who encountered her during the training week recognized her immediately from the command briefings and cultural awareness sessions that had used her case as an example of proper credential verification importance, and their interactions demonstrated professional respect for her qualifications and acknowledgement of the injustice she had experienced. She conducted a voluntary training session for 200 base personnel, focusing on special operations integration principles and the operational security implications of proper credential verification. Her presentation emphasizing that special operations personnel often worked in ambiguous environments where conventional identification methods might not apply. Maya described scenarios from her operational experience where her credentials had been questioned appropriately and verification had been completed quickly through proper channels, contrasting those professional interactions with Brennan's pattern of refusal to verify despite having immediate access to confirmation. The training audience included gate guards, operations center personnel, and unit commanders who would be responsible for implementing verification procedures in their daily operations. Hammond presented the base case study at a theater command conference attended by senior leaders from all 17 regional installations. Her briefing focusing on lessons learned about how systematic discrimination could persist for 18 months before detection, and how comprehensive reforms could transform institutional culture when implemented with genuine command commitment. She emphasized that accountability for individual misconduct had been necessary but insufficient, and that lasting change required automated systems, mandatory training, direct liaison relationships with special operations commands, and transparent oversight that made discriminatory patterns immediately visible. The regional commander directed all attending commanders to implement similar reforms at their installations within 60 days. The 3 previous victims who had experienced credential dismissal under Brennan's command all remained in active service 6 months after receiving formal remediation, their continued military careers serving as evidence that proper accountability and institutional reform could repair damage from discriminatory treatment. The Navy EOD technician had been selected for advanced training and promotion to Senior Chief Petty Officer. The Air Force Combat Controller had received assignment to an elite special tactics squadron and had been awarded an achievement medal for her performance during joint operations. The Marine Intelligence Officer had been promoted to Major and was serving as an operations officer at a joint command where her top secret clearance and analytical expertise were fully utilized. Brennan's court-martial concluded after a 3-day trial that heard testimony from Maya, Torres, Hammond, and multiple witnesses who described his pattern of refusing to verify credentials while filing false reports claiming verification was ongoing. The military judge found him guilty on all specifications, including 4 counts of false official statements and 3 counts of attempted unauthorized access to classified materials. The evidence of his terminal attempting to breach Maya's encrypted device proving unambiguous despite his claims that the access attempts were accidental. The sentence included dismissal from service, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and confinement for 18 months at a military correctional facility. Chun briefed the Special Operations Command senior leadership about the case outcome and the theater-wide reforms that had resulted from the investigation, her presentation highlighting how a single incident of credential dismissal had revealed systematic failures affecting multiple installations and had catalyzed policy changes protecting special operations personnel across an entire combatant command area. The Special Operations Command Deputy Commander directed that the verification protocols developed at Hammond Base be recommended to all geographic combatant commands as best practices for special operations integration, potentially extending the reforms beyond the single theater where the original incident had occurred. Maya received notification that the verification protocols implemented in response to her detention had been formally designated as the Reeves Protocol in recognition of her role in exposing the systematic failures and her professionalism throughout the wrongful confinement. The protocol name would appear in official policy documents, training materials, and command guidance distributed across Department of Defense installations worldwide, ensuring that her experience would contribute to protecting future special operations personnel from similar discriminatory treatment. She accepted the recognition with mixed feelings, appreciating that her difficult experience had generated meaningful institutional change, while recognizing that such change should not have required her detention to catalyze action. Hammond reviewed the Base Command Climate Survey results, showing significant improvement in perceptions of equal opportunity and in confidence that credential verification will be handled professionally regardless of service member gender or appearance. The survey included specific questions about awareness of proper verification procedures and about willingness to report potential discrimination, with response rates indicating that base personnel understood both the technical requirements and the command commitment to enforcement. The improved metrics demonstrated that cultural change had accompanied policy implementation, creating sustainable improvement rather than mere compliance with new regulations. Torres transitioned from his temporary assignment on the theater audit team back to his permanent unit, with a commendation recognizing his investigation work and his development of training materials that had been implemented across 17 installations. His experience investigating the credential dismissal pattern and developing systemic reforms led to his selection for assignment to the Equal Opportunity Office at Regional Command, where his responsibilities would include oversight of verification compliance and investigation of potential discrimination cases. The assignment ensured that the institutional knowledge gained from investigating Brennan's conduct would continue to inform policy development and enforcement. The Special Operations Liaison Office at Hammond's Base had become a model replicated at 6 other installations within the theater, with plans for expansion to all 17 bases within the next fiscal year. Each liaison office provided the same capabilities, including immediate credential verification through classified databases, coordination of special operations personnel movements, and monthly integration briefings for conventional forces about special operations capabilities and composition. The network of liaison offices created systematic communication between special operations and conventional commands that prevented the isolation and lack of understanding that had enabled Brennan's discriminatory assumptions to appear reasonable. Maya reflected on the 6-month period since her detention as she prepared to depart the forward operating base after completing the joint training evolution, recognizing that Brennan's decision to question her credentials after she had saved 6 lives had ultimately generated reforms protecting countless future special operations personnel from similar treatment. The rescue mission that should have ended with simple medical evaluation and return to her unit had instead triggered a comprehensive investigation, criminal prosecution, and theater-wide policy changes that would affect hundreds of thousands of service members over the coming years. She considered whether the personal cost of wrongful confinement and credential questioning was justified by the institutional benefits that had resulted, concluding that while she would have preferred not to experience discrimination, her ability to contribute to meaningful reform provided some measure of meaning to an otherwise unjust situation. Maya stood before the Special Operations Command training cadre 9 months after her detention, her role as guest instructor bringing her back to share operational lessons with the next generation of special operators preparing for deployment to combat theaters. The classroom held 40 students from multiple special operations units, including Special Forces, Rangers, SEALs, and Air Force Special Tactics personnel, their diverse backgrounds reflecting the integration that had become standard across special operations forces. She began her presentation by describing the combat rescue mission that had saved 6 lives and had subsequently exposed systematic credential verification failures affecting installations across an entire theater of operations. Her briefing emphasized the intersection between operational security and proper credential verification, explaining that special operations personnel often worked in environments where their identities and authorities were deliberately ambiguous to protect classified missions and personnel. The entire system depended on verification protocols that could confirm credentials quickly through proper channels when questions arose, because delays or refusals to verify left legitimate operators vulnerable, while encouraging adversaries to exploit the resulting confusion. Maya described how Brennan's refusal to verify her credentials despite having immediate access to confirmation had created security risks that extended beyond her personal detention to affect ongoing special operations that required her participation. The training cadre incorporated Maya's case into their curriculum as a mandatory module for all special operations personnel about cultural awareness, credential protection, and the importance of proper verification procedures when working with conventional forces. The module presented her detention as an example of how gender discrimination could manifest in operational context through assumptions about who could hold advanced qualifications, and how such discrimination created both equal opportunity violations and security vulnerabilities. Students learned that they should expect professional verification when their credentials were questioned and that they had responsibility to escalate through their chains of command if verification was refused or delayed beyond reasonable time frames. Hammond presented the Forward Operating Base Case Study at the annual Department of Defense Equal Opportunity Conference attended by representatives from all service branches and from combatant commands worldwide. Her presentation documented the complete arc from initial incident through investigation, accountability, and comprehensive reform, with specific focus on metrics showing sustained improvement and prevention of similar incidents across 17 installations over 9 months. The conference attendees requested copies of the Reeves Protocol Implementation Guide and the Enhanced Verification Training Curriculum, indicating interest in adapting the reforms for their own commands and recognizing that credential dismissal affecting female service members with advanced qualifications was not isolated to a single theater. The verification protocol that bore Maya's name appeared in updated Department of Defense Guidance on Special Operations Integration, the official policy document recommending that all installations adopt similar procedures to ensure proper credential verification regardless of service member gender or appearance. The guidance specified 3-step verification including database checks, direct contact with credentialing authorities, and completion within 24 hours, with automatic escalation if timelines were not met. Implementation of the Reeves Protocol became a metric evaluated during installation inspections and command assessments, creating institutional pressure for compliance that extended beyond individual commander discretion. Chen coordinated a follow-up assessment 1 year after the original incident to evaluate whether the reforms had achieved lasting cultural change or merely temporary compliance. Her methodology, including interviews with personnel at multiple levels, review of verification case files, and analysis of command climate survey data. The assessment concluded that the reforms had fundamentally transformed how conventional forces approached credential verification for special operations personnel, with automated systems and mandatory training, creating both technical safeguards and cultural awareness that made discriminatory patterns significantly more difficult to implement. The success at Hammond's base and across the theater had generated interest from 3 other combatant commands about replicating the comprehensive reform approach. Torres received promotion to Master Sergeant based partially on his investigation work and policy development contributions that had affected verification procedures across 147 installations. His performance evaluation noting that his diligence had exposed systematic discrimination and his technical expertise had created automated solutions preventing future incidents. His assignment to the Regional Equal Opportunity Office had evolved into a permanent position overseeing credential verification compliance, with authority to conduct audits at any installation and to recommend corrective action when verification procedures were not followed properly. The position ensured that institutional knowledge from investigating Brennan's pattern would continue informing oversight and policy development. Maya returned to operational deployment, with her Special Forces team conducting classified missions in a different theater, her experience at Hammond's base having informed her approach to working with conventional forces and her awareness of the importance of proper credential verification when integration was required. She maintained periodic contact with Chun and Hammond to stay informed about the reform implementation progress and to provide input when policy questions arose that would benefit from operator perspective. Her willingness to share her experience in training environments and policy discussions demonstrated commitment to ensuring that her detention would contribute to protecting future special operations personnel. Have you ever seen someone's courage change an entire system? What's your take on this story? Share in the comments below. The 6 soldiers whose lives Maya had saved during the combat rescue mission learned about her subsequent detention and the reforms that had resulted from investigating that incident. Their perspective providing unique insight into how her professionalism under fire had extended beyond the immediate rescue to generate institutional change benefiting thousands of service members. Corporal Jenkins, who had survived the femoral artery bleed because of Maya's immediate tourniquet application, wrote a letter to Special Operations Command describing how learning about her treatment after saving his life had motivated him to become an advocate for equal opportunity in his own unit. Hammond received notification 2 years after the original incident that the forward operating base had been selected to host a regional training conference on special operations integration. The selection recognizing her installation's transformation from a location where systematic credential dismissal had occurred to a model for proper verification procedures and cultural awareness. The conference would bring together personnel from all 17 theater installations to share lessons learned and to observe the special operations liaison office operations that had become the standard for conventional force coordination with special operations units. Her keynote address would focus on how comprehensive accountability and systemic reform could transform command failures into opportunities for meaningful institutional improvement. The Reeves Protocol had been implemented at over 200 installations across 4 combatant commands within 2 years of Maya's detention. The rapid adoption reflecting recognition that credential verification failures represented both security vulnerabilities and equal opportunity violations requiring systematic solutions. Training materials developed from the original case study reached an estimated 750,000 military personnel through mandatory courses and professional development sessions, creating widespread awareness about proper verification procedures and about how discriminatory assumptions could compromise operational effectiveness. The scale of implementation demonstrated that Maya's experience had catalyzed change, extending far beyond the single forward operating base where her credentials had been questioned. Maya stood at the entrance of Hammond's forward operating base 3 years after her original detention, arriving to participate in the Regional Integration Conference and to observe how the reforms had matured into standard operations. A young female Army Ranger approached the gate with credentials for a scheduled training coordination meeting, and Maya watched as the gate guard followed the Reeves Protocol by immediately checking the database, confirming her Ranger qualification through direct contact with the Ranger Regiment headquarters and completing verification within 12 minutes. The Ranger entered the base without delay or questioning, her credentials respected and her qualifications confirmed through proper channels, demonstrating the cultural transformation that had occurred since Brennan's systematic refusal to verify. The guard recognized Maya from training materials and thanked her for the reforms that had made his job clearer by providing specific procedures to follow rather than leaving verification decisions to individual judgment. Maya accepted his thanks and reflected that the system now protected both special operations personnel, whose credentials deserved respect, and conventional forces, whose security responsibilities required proper verification. The balance between those requirements had been achieved through automation, training, oversight, and accountability that created sustainable cultural change rather than temporary compliance. Chun joined Maya at the base entrance, and they walked together toward the conference center where 200 military personnel had assembled to learn about integration best practices developed in response to Maya's detention and the subsequent investigation. Chun observed that Maya's decision to leap from a helicopter into gunfire to save 6 lives had ultimately generated reforms protecting countless service members from discriminatory treatment, creating a legacy extending far beyond the combat action that had earned her commendation. Maya responded that she had simply done her job during the rescue mission and had maintained professionalism during her wrongful detention, but that the real credit belonged to Torres, who had investigated thoroughly, to Hammond, who had held personnel accountable and implemented comprehensive reforms, and to the system that had eventually corrected Brennan's injustice despite the 18 months his pattern had persisted. The conference proceeded with presentations documenting verification compliance metrics, cultural awareness improvements, and the operational benefits of proper special operations integration. But the underlying message remained constant throughout. One person's courage to challenge the impossible, combined with institutional commitment to accountability and reform, could transform systematic failures into models for meaningful change. Maya's experience had proven that truth ultimately prevailed when supported by thorough investigation, comprehensive policy development, and sustained command emphasis on both equal opportunity and operational security.